Hello again, everyone. So in the last video, I showed you how to create your teacher account in Scratch. Now that we've done that, I want to introduce you to Scratch, the platform itself, show you how a couple of different things work, and basically just get you comfortable using the Create page. Right now, I am on the home screen at scratch.mit.edu. I am logged in to my account here, and this is the home page. So the first thing I want to show you is the Create page. So let me click that. I'm going to come up here in the left-hand corner at the top of the screen and click on Create. And it'll take just a minute to create the new project. So this is what every new project you ever create in Scratch is going to look like. So I'm gonna give you a brief tour of the screen. So the first thing, I'm gonna start here, even though it's on the right. This is the stage. So this is where you can actually see your project at any given time. So this is great. I love this because one of the most important things you want to do when you're creating software, and I don't care whether it's in Scratch or whether you're building a website or whether you are making some enormous project in Python or JavaScript, it doesn't matter. You always want to test your code as frequently as possible. I always tell people the more frequently you test, the fewer problems you're going to have to debug down the line. Because if I test this now and there's a problem, there's a very small scope of things that I need to check on because I haven't done that much work on it yet. And so if you're testing your project at least every 5 minutes or so, it's going to make your life a lot easier in terms of building your project. And it also tends to help, especially when you're learning, to figure out what things actually do. If you assume you know what a block does and you put it in and you don't test it, then later on down the line you might think something else is not working instead of the block that you picked by mistake. So testing things frequently is going to really help you get a much clearer idea of what everything does before you go on to your next steps. Okay, so this is the stage, and in order to run our projects, we'll click the green flag button. Or for other projects, you might start it by pressing the spacebar on your keyboard. It kind of depends on which events you pick. Don't worry, we will discuss that in great length later on. On my stage, I have Scratch the Cat, pun intended, and Scratch is my first sprite. So sprites are any of the characters or objects that you put onto your screen. And you can give each sprite its own set of instructions. So when we start building a project, if I click on Scratch, the cat, down here, I'll see the coding palette for Scratch. This is the coding palette, so this is where we will assemble our blocks. Again, don't try to understand everything just yet. We're still going through this. So all of our code, all of our instructions for Scratch the Cat will be right here in this area when we start building our project. We will end up with other sprites, and each of them will have their own set of instructions, and when you select them down here in the bottom area of the screen, you'll see their coding palette. So you'll be able to tell what instructions have I given that character so that you can troubleshoot and things like that. Over here, these are our coding blocks. And you can see that they are shaped like Legos, and they're meant to snap together. You've got some blocks where you can change the value that's inside that block. We also have things that we could, put into those sections, so, I could drag this inside of another block. If I wanted to, it wouldn't go there just because. So the blocks are meant to work together. It's like, putting together a Lego set, literally. And they all do different things, and they are color-coded. So I mentioned on the last video that the Scratch cards with the tutorials on them are all color-coded, and this is what I meant. So all of our motion blocks are blue. All of our looks blocks are this darker purple. Sound blocks are this sort of, magenta pink color. Events blocks, which are very important, are all this gold color. And you can see we have that when the green flag is clicked block, which is what would make your game start when the green flag is clicked. we'll get into that much more in later videos. We've got this darker gold. This is the control section, and we are going to have a lot of fun with those blocks. They really help you shape your projects, so we'll get into that much more later. Sensing blocks, which you can see have to do with, is a key being pressed? Is one of my sprites touching another sprite? Is my sprite draggable on the screen? So there's a lot of different things in here. There are operators, and I'm hoping that my math teachers are looking at this and getting a lot of great ideas, because there are some very cool things that you can do with the operator blocks. And then under that we've got variables, which again, not just useful for math. I got to point that out. Variables are used a lot in coding, and they're used anytime where you want to create instructions for a more specific result when you don't know the information. So for example, one of the things I love to do in the beginning of a project is have one of my sprites say hello and ask for the name of the person who's either playing or watching the project. And then if I save that name as a variable, I can use that to refer to my audience by their first name throughout the project. So it's a really fun and easy way to customize a project so that the person watching it feels like they're included in the action. So we'll talk about that more later. And then down here you can create blocks that's a bit more advanced, and so I'm not going to go into that, but there are more advanced options in here for people who have the time and the inclination to do some experimenting. Okay, so in addition to code for each character can also have multiple costumes. These are things that we'll use to animate characters later on. It's just like old school animation where you flip between drawings, except in this case the drawings are those costumes. And then we can add sounds for our different characters. I can't remember if I set this video to record any system sounds, so I don't know if you'll hear this or not, but I can preview those sounds by clicking on the play button here. And so Scratch very naturally comes with a meow sound. There are lots of other sounds that we can add, which we'll cover in a future video. So I'm going to click on the Code tab. That's where we're going to spend most of our time, because that is where we will give instructions to our sprites. So we've got our sets of blocks that are color-coded. You can click on the dots to go directly to a section. You can also scroll between the sections. Here we've got the coding palette. This is for Scratch the cat. And if you look, you've got a little light picture of Scratch right there, so you can always tell which sprite you're giving instruction to. When you start getting up to like 5 or 6 different sprites, that's definitely going to come in handy. We've got our sprite down here, and then we have like a control panel to use to control our sprite. So I'm going to rename my sprite, and I'm just going to call him Scratch. And you can see his name label changed right down here. If I click and drag him around on the screen, you'll see that his X and Y coordinates change. So Scratch can be really useful for teaching kids about coordinate planes and about geometry. And you'll see if he's up and all the way to the right, those numbers are both positive and they're pretty big. And if I drag him all the way to the lower left, those numbers are both negative and pretty far negative. So if I am down in the lower part of my screen, my Y coordinate will be negative. If I go to the top of my screen, my Y coordinate is positive. And then same thing, far on the left, my X coordinate is negative, and far on the right, the X coordinate is very positive. So you know that right here in the center, if I manage to put Scratch just in the right spot, I can get 0, 0, or you can even just type that in here. So if I wanted to put him in the exact center of the page, I could put 0 in both of those places, and Scratch will adjust his position for me. So this will be important when we think about moving sprites around on the screen. So just wanted to preview that. You can show and hide a sprite with these options here. There are also blocks for that. So if you ever need one of your sprites to just disappear off the screen, there's ways to do that with the code, which is a lot more reliable. You can also change the size of the sprite. So if I wanted a very large Scratch the cat, I can set his size to 250%. You can also make him smaller, so I could come down to 75% and he shrinks down. So that is a useful way to control how the sprites look on your screen. There's also some different direction options here, so I can rotate him around this way, which is kind of interesting. I don't know of any cats that tend to move in that way. You can flip him back and forth using this reflection button here, and now you'll see he either faces one way or the other. So I will say I get asked a lot, how do I make my sprite face the other direction? That's the easiest way to do it. And then you can also lock it so that the sprite cannot be rotated. So that's a thing to keep in mind also. But I'm just gonna say 90, and we'll leave him right there exactly as he was in the beginning. We also have, under the stage, we'll have any backdrops that we have added to our project. And these can really help set the mood for your project. I'm not actually going to begin a consistent project right now, but just to show you guys how this works, I'm going to add a backdrop. So in order to do that, I'm going to come down here and click on this Choose a Backdrop button. As you get more advanced, you can paint your own backdrop, you can pick one at random for a surprise, or you can upload a backdrop. So you can take a picture off the internet, or you can take a picture with your phone and then upload it here, and then you can use a backdrop of your own making. But yeah, a lot of students I've worked with have really enjoyed the paint options for both sprites and for backdrops. So don't forget that those are there. But I'm going to click Choose a Backdrop, and it's going to take me into the Choose a Backdrop page. And here you can scroll through all of the content that's already included in Scratch. And there's quite a lot of it, and they do add new things all of the time. So, you know, every time I come through here, pretty much, there's something new that they did not have before, which I think, you know, is a really cool thing. It's always fun to just come look through here and be like, what have I not used before? So I'm just going to, what do I want to pick? I'm going to pick school. Seems appropriate, right? So now Scratch is on our school backdrop, and like I said, you're going to start every project with Scratch. So another one of the questions you will be asked very quickly and very frequently is, how do I get rid of Scratch? If you come down here in the lower part of the page, there is a trash can in the upper right hand corner of Scratch's sprite icon. So I'm going to click on that, and Scratch goes bye-bye. Perhaps he is curled up somewhere in a heated bed. And then I can come over here, and just as I had the Choose a Backdrop button, I have a Choose a Sprite Backdrop. Same options. Students can go in and create their own sprites. I had one student do that. She wanted to make an animated game where, you know, the ears on her sprite flopped. So she had to go in and create you know, dozen or so different sprites showing ears in different positions and things like that. So I'm going to click the Choose a Sprite button. And again, we have this page, so many different options here. The thing that's really cool about this is you'll notice that when I hover over the bear, I see the bear moving. When you hover over any of the sprites, before you commit to putting them in your project, you can hover over them and see what different costumes they already have. And so if you're looking to make a dance party game, for example, you definitely want to pick a character who's got some dance moves that you can animate through. It makes it a lot easier. But you know, you might be doing something totally different. You might be telling a story about a bear walking through the woods. This bear is not walking, but I have another bear over here, which conveniently enough is called Bear Walking. And if you look at that, he's got a number of different costumes that we can use to animate him walking through the woods. You know, and so some of the sprites have, you know, Ben has some soccer moves, and some of the sprites don't have any alternate costumes. They're not meant to be animated, at least not easily. And so I would definitely encourage you to think about what project you're going to build before you pick a sprite, and then make sure to hover over your sprite so that you can see if it moves the way you want it to within your game. So we've got Avery walking, and then we've got different categories here across the top. I recently made a dance party project with folks, and so clicking on the dance section, that really helped me narrow down my options and see which sprites have the different poses that make them good for a dance video. Same thing with Juvie. Juvie's got a lot of different dance moves in here that we can use And same thing with all of these different characters. So they've really tried to organize this to make it easy for you to pick sprites based on what you need your characters to do. So there's a lot of different things in here. There is fashion. So here's Harper. Harper's got all of these different costumes that we can give her. And you can put a dress on her. You can put a dress sprite onto a person sprite, and sort of have, a dress-up game for that character. And then in music, we've got, guitars, we've got drums, we've got, all these different things. And so it just depends on what you want to do with your project, but you can find pretty much everything you need in here. So I'm going to go back. I am a big fan of the dragon sprite. The dragon's my favorite. So I'm going to click on dragon, and there is the dragon added to my project. If I decide my dragon is a little too intimidating, I might shrink her down a bit. Maybe she's someone's pet dragon. So maybe I want to put her with another sprite. Let's see. I'm going to pick Danny, and Danny's a little taller than I'm looking for, so maybe I'll say 80% here. And I'm going to have Danny stand right here next to the dragon. And I'm going to make it so Danny faces the dragon. So I'm going to use that direction option that I showed you guys. And the reason I wanted to add a couple sprites here is to show you that I can enter code for my dragon right here. If I want to then add code for Danny, I need to click on Danny's selector button right here. And so you can see I can give different code to both of those sprites. And so I think what I'd like to do, just to close out this video, is show you how to have a sprite say hello. So we always start every set of instructions you will ever create for a sprite in Scratch is going to start with an event block. And so I'm going to pick this when the green flag is clicked block right here. And the interesting thing about having a character say hello is that you're going to go to the looks section because the words will actually appear in a speech bubble on the screen. You will not hear the character say them. There are ways to change that, which I will try to include in this course as well. So hopefully there will be a video about that. I have less than a week to get this done, so I will try to get to that if I can. But for right now, we're just going to have Danny say hello for 2 seconds. And actually, I think I want Danny to say hello and then say, "My name is Danny." And because I've added more text there, I'm going to change this to 5 seconds. This is a good thing to tell your students about. When you put a bunch of text on there, you want to ask them, are you sure everyone can read it that quickly? There might be younger kids who don't read as fast as you do, or there might be people, who have trouble with their vision, and it might make it so that, it takes longer for them to read the words that are on the screen. And get them thinking about their audience very early on in the project. It can help encourage them to get more creative with their project. It can help them remember that other people might see these things besides them, and it can also help them make them feel connected to the people who will look at their projects. So I changed that to 5 seconds. And now, as I mentioned, you always want to test your code very frequently. So I'm going to come up here, and because I started with the when the green flag is clicked event block, I'm going to click on the green flag, and Danny says, "Hello, my name is Danny." Yep, and so I was able to read it. I read quickly, but there were a few seconds after that where it was still up on the screen even after I was done. So I feel like hopefully 5 seconds is enough. I might think about that more later and decide I want to leave it up for 6 or 8 seconds. I can always come in and change that. But that is just one very quick little thing that you can do to give one of your sprites instructions. I am going to be making more instruction videos. This is not the last one, but I would definitely encourage you to experiment. Have fun with this. This should be fun for you and for your students. Try things. If you don't like what they do, take them out again. try something different. The best way to learn to code is to be curious and to experiment, and to not be too deterred if things don't go the way you think they should. So with that, I'm going to end this video before it gets any longer, but I hope you had fun, and I hope you keep coding. Thanks, guys.